Okay. All righty.
We are broadcasting.
Hey, hello everyone.
Welcome everyone. We're gonna let everyone get into the room. Some of you got a fun treat when we bypass the green room, but we're just gonna give everyone a second to come into the room. We have so many people here tonight. Welcome, happy Friday.
I will drink to that. It's Friday. It's Friday with Neil. Oh, come on. It doesn't get better than this. Mate, you are my social life.
And the wonderful thing about this is that I happen to love politics and prose. It's one of my favorite bookshops in the world. And there is no way in the normal way that reality would have worked that I could have been in politics and prose interviewing you for this, no matter how much I wanted to. The world would never have made it happen. And now we get to do this conversation, and I'm so thrilled.
Well, I'm grinning like the Yorkshire cat. Not the Yorkshire cat. I keep saying Yorkshire cat, not the Cheshire cat. But I'm gonna have to kind of control my aching muscles here. Thank you for doing this, Neil. And for the record, politics and prose. I don't know if you're the same, Neil, but do you feel a kind of ancient loyalty to bookshops, to indies in North America who had you over when there was really no reason to? Kind of the first time I was there, maybe I had a crowd of about 15 people, a third of whom had the politics and prose badge poking out of their coat pocket, and I never forget that. It's always in my mind, and I get a few more than 15, and you are probably into quadruple.
Well, we thank you
figures,
guys for being here. There are definitely some of those same staff members watching tonight. And we have more than 15 people by far, so we will go ahead and get started. But I just want to welcome everyone first to PNP Live. My name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm the Deputy Director of Events at Politics and Prose, and we are so happy for you all to be here. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. I am dropping the link in the chat right now for you to purchase another copy of Utopia Avenue. I know everyone here already has a copy, but they make great gifts, so feel free to pick up another. Politics and Prose is offering $5 flat rate shipping, so no matter how much stuff you add to your cart, it's $5. And all of our 3 store locations are open for socially distant browsing, so you can come and pick your book up at our store as well. Also, and very importantly, you can ask either of our authors a question tonight by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to try to get to as many of those questions as we possibly can tonight. But if we run out of time and we can't address your question, we apologize. All right, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's guests. David Mitchell is the author of the novels Ghost Written, Cloud Atlas, The Bone Clocks, and many others. Twice shortlisted for the Booker Prize, in 2018, he won the Sunday Times Award for Literary Excellence. His new book tells the story of the turbulent life and times of the British band Utopia Avenue, and ultimately asks the question, can we really change the world, or does the world change us? Moderating the conversation is Neil Gaiman, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of more titles than I can possibly recount here, but they include Norse mythology, Neverwhere, and American Gods. Among his numerous literary awards are the Newbery and Carnegie Medals and the Hugo, Nebula, World Fantasy, and Will Eisner Awards. So I'm so pleased to welcome Neil and David to PNP Live, and welcome. Let's take it away.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Isn't this wonderful?
It's,
I love.
It's great.
And it's also a wonderful excuse to catch up with you, because in the real world, neither of us would actually quite have the gumption to just say, "Hey, would you like to do a Zoom call for an hour or 2.
Oh mate, I would have loved to, and I kind of apologise, but but you've been so busy with all the screen work, and I just sort of don't want to be one more email in your inbox that's sort of taking time out of your day or anything like that. But I loved our last event. It was in Islington in London,
So
wasn't it?
good. It was at Union Chapel.
Yeah.
And it was one of those times that you get up in front of people to talk about stuff, and then all of a sudden 90 minutes just went away and you have no idea where it went. And at the end of the event, people start clapping and you remember that you were on a stage talking in front of people.
Rather like now, except we're zooming across the Irish Sea. You're on Sky at the moment, I believe, which is why the background lighting in your room looks a bit like mine, in the same time zone.
It is.
And
although one thing that we've got here now, which I haven't had for the last couple of months, is night. The first thing I did when I got to Sky, because I had to do something, was I bought myself a large telescope.
Oh.
And the large telescope arrived, and it was only after the large telescope arrived that I'd start looking out of the window and go, well, when did the stars come out? And then I went onto the web and discovered the concept of astronomical night, which you do not get on the Isle of Skye from the end of May, all of June, and most of July.
Oh, because of the latitude you're at.
We're too far north. And so what you get is the sun sets about 11 o'clock at night. And around 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning, the dawn chorus starts. In May, it was cold, which was really bizarre. And night didn't happen. So finally, I got really excited last night. I saw stars for the first time in months.
I guess you spent time on Iceland in your travels as a writer, in the summer?
Once.
Yeah.
That once was probably, that once spawned American Gods.
Really?
And I think it came out of a kind of sleeplessness that had moved into altered states. I was living I was living in Minneapolis, or just outside Minneapolis at the time. I needed to get to Norway. My travel agent, because this was back in the days when you actually had travel agents.
Yeah, I remember them well.
Travel agent said, you know, Icelandair, if you fly Icelandair from Minneapolis, they just started doing this over the pole thing.
Yeah.
And you get free stopovers in Iceland.
Yes,
you take
I
a break
remember that.
because they want you to spend your tourist dollars.
Yeah.
And I said, what a great idea. So at 7 o'clock at night, I got on the plane. And I didn't sleep on the plane because it wasn't a very long journey. And I got off at midnight Minneapolis time, which was maybe 6 in the morning Iceland time. And then I thought, well, I'll just keep going till it gets dark. And it was July the 3rd. So around about 2 o'clock in the morning, it was like the sun went behind a cloud. And then it came out again, and I had thin, very thin white curtains that did not make the light go away.
Yeah.
And I did not sleep that night. And the next day, I was just wandering around sleepless, and then started to try and do weird, desperate things that you do in Sunday in Iceland when everything is shut, because back then it was everything was shut as well. So I'd pass all the shops and they were all shut, and all the restaurants and they were all shut. And I found a little tourist office, a downtown tourist place that is no longer there. And I went in, and they had a little diorama, a tabletop diorama of the voyages of Leif Erikson and Eric the Red and these guys. And it showed the visit to Vinland. And I remember thinking, well, I wonder if they took their gods with them. And then I thought, I wonder if they left their gods behind when they left. And suddenly it was like a little door in my head opened, which is that odd place that creativity comes from, which weirdly was the first thing I wanted to ask you about.
Whoa.
Because one of the things that I found myself genuinely excited by in Utopia Avenue. Not just appreciating, but actually excited by, is the question that all creative people are asked over and over again is, where do you get your ideas? And where does the stuff come from? And one of the things that is fascinating about Utopia Avenue is you're going, well, here are the songs. Here is some key event, something that unlocks a song.
Well, my word. Thank you both for the anecdote and the effortless segue, if I may say so, Mr. Gaiman. You are, and if you look yourself up on YouTube, which isn't necessarily the healthiest way to spend time on YouTube. I mean, typing your own name, whoever you are, into the search engine, but many of sort of YouTube's Neil Gaiman's greatest hits are you answering that question. You are really good at it. I don't know if you remember one in Melbourne. I happen to know this because I looked it up earlier this afternoon, partly in preparation for this, and I don't stalk you quite as obsessively as it sounds, but it was one in Melbourne, and you talked about ideas being a confluence, and everyone knows about werewolves biting you under a full moon, and you turn into a werewolf. But what if the werewolf bites a goldfish? And you took so you have two ideas, neither of which in themselves is particularly novel, but it's the combination that is so irresistible. Ideas. I suppose, I don't know if you find this, writing about your home art form is tricky. It shouldn't be, but it is. Writers writing about writing, certainly me writing about writing, I feel an initial resistance. Maybe it feels a little, I'm trying to think of a less ucky word than incestuous, but maybe it's just too close to home, or maybe I don't notice it because things are hiding too successfully in plain sight for me. It just becomes more obvious when I think about another art form, when I think about a different tribe. And in the case of Utopia Avenue, of course, it's music. This is, I suppose, a part of that oft quoted aphorism, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. There's an impossibility in the undertaking from the very beginning. Novels don't have speakers, and I need to try to get the reader to get excited about a band that never existed, who make music that was never recorded. And how on earth do you do that? The answer, as you will know, is to try to mobilize all the elements, all the things a novel is made of: the plot, the characters, the style, themes, ideas, even the structure. You try to bend those before your will, and make the characters musicians, make the structure of albums, make the themes and ideas about music, make the plot being a journey through recording studios and venues and stages, and try to steep all the aspects of the novel in music the best you can, and hope that it adds up to a successful undertaking. A part of this, of course, yes, they write songs, we write stories, you speak them. Musicians, the first thing they think about when they wake up in the morning, the last thing they think about when they go to bed at night, at least the ones whose books I read, at least the ones I interviewed for the book, it's songs. It's this weird place where circles of a Venn diagram overlap. There's music on one circle, there's lyrics in another, and this strange organism that somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, but sometimes longer, sometimes a bit shorter. They wouldn't be what they are without the lyrics, but of course they're much more than the lyrics, because I Feel Love by Donna Summer on a page, or even Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen on a page, would be execrable poetry, yet with the music they become sublime. So how do they make them? Where do they come from? I asked David Byrne about this a few nights ago, and depends on the song, just as I guess for us it depends on the story, and there are as many answers as there are songs, but broadly they well, sometimes you get the music first, sometimes you get the lyrics first, sometimes they both come along together. Sometimes some songwriters will massively overwrite, and they're rather like a director making a film. I used to think in my innocence you merely shoot the script, but no, you shoot 15 versions of each scene, as you know, and then actually you assemble it in the editing room. That's where so much of it happens. And some songwriters work the same way. They kind of assemble a tank of melodic and lyrical ideas and sort of allow it to stew and seep, sometimes for years. So it wasn't really a question you asked, Neil, but just my response to you was it was a precondition of the impossibility of the book writing about music, made me need to kind of orientate every aspect of it towards writing, including what the characters are doing all day. There's 3 different songwriters. They've all got to sound a bit different, or quite a lot different, for that to be plausible as well. So it's true, though. It is a kind of MRI scan of the process of how do you make something out of nothing? How do you make a song where there wasn't a song? Which is probably also applicable. How do you make a 600-page novel like American Gods where there wasn't anything? Or how do you make a beautiful short story, which you've got lots of, which I know a couple of them you kind of wrote on the plane to the Sydney Writers' Festival, and they're really good. And how do you do that kind of just like that, as Tommy Cooper used to say all those years ago? Over to you.
I wish I knew, and I wish it always worked. And of course, that's the other bit of it, which is if it was completely 100% predictable. And I suspect that, the truth is that you can probably do it with fabulous short stories in the same way that you do a novel, which is actually you just sit down and start making it. And the reason why I've written, one of my favorite of my short stories was written on the way to the Sydney Writers' Festival. Some of it on a plane, but most of it sitting waiting for my luggage to come off the rack, and actually just sitting there waiting for luggage that was not coming, and sitting and writing. I promised I would get the story done, and I suddenly had an idea, and I wrote 2 or 3 paragraphs of it, and now it was it was alive, and I kind of knew where it was going, but more than anything else, it had a voice. And I think there's a weird similarity between a good song and a good short story. In a novel, you need lots of voices, or you need a voice that can go for a very long time. Utopia Avenue, you have different voices. I don't think anybody would confuse a page of the inside of Jasper's head with the inside of Elf's head. They don't read the same. But with a short story, sometimes you just have to know what it sounds like. and suddenly you're writing that, and sometimes with a song. I don't write many songs, but every now and then I've been delighted by a rhyme or a line that didn't exist before I got there. It's like you're doing that thing that they do in cartoons where you put the bricks down in front of you and then you walk across the sky with them.
Yeah.
Which is magical. So talking about bricks, 2 for 2 on segues. This is another, one of the things that I loved is this is another brick in the wall of the Mitchellverse.
So it is. Yeah.
And one that actually feels like a kind of a cornerstone brick in that it joins a lot of things and places together. I mean, you've already established that everything takes place in the same universe, but there is I love for want of a better word, the economy of what you're doing now. There is a point where if you need somebody, it felt to me, and I could be completely wrong, like you go, I need these people, but I've already invented these people. So, with someone like Crispin Hershey, I love the idea of him running around in his little cowboy thing, ritually killing people who will now die.
You spotted that all the people he goes bang bang to in our timeline will see. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely, I was very relieved when Jasper got off.
Well, thank you.
But also that there's the thing of going, and this is also Crispin, and I know Crispin's story, and here is Afra Booth at at Crispin's father's party, and she's going to show up on that panel in the Bone Clocks, and he's going to piss all over her, and it's really awkward. And I love the fact that she knew his dad and was at his dad. This.
Oh, well, thank you. The Yorkshire cat grin is aching again, but thanks for reading so attentively, Neil.
But it's such a joy to read because it feels like, it does that thing, I feel, where it makes it, because it's continuing to draw links, it very much makes the other books ever so slightly more interesting. And for me, it makes this book more interesting. Not in the sense of it's a game, and I know that I'm allowed to miss things. I know that I have missed characters from other books. And on the other hand, I was, Louisa Ray had been around for 25 pages when I suddenly went, hang on, you're Louisa Ray. And you're from Cloud Atlas. And that kind of, and you were semi-fictional in Cloud Atlas. So
yeah, I've got to sort that out. Yeah, I've got to sort that out, haven't I? Yeah.
I kind of liked that though, the sort of the in and out of metafictionalness of Louisa Ray, who is a fictional character in Cloud Atlas, or is she? Or is this the original who?
Oh yeah, well, that might just be my way out. Yes, yes, I do have to sort out Louisa Ray. It's one of these things, rather like an architectural problem with your house that you can ignore for a while because your house isn't falling down, but the more extensions you build onto it and the more floors and loft conversions you add, the more pressing the need becomes to sort out the metafictionality of Louisa Ray. So thank you for bringing that to my attention again. I think I've got another reason. When I think I was asked this question at Islington, I had 3 reasons. 1, it's fun, and what's wrong with a bit of fun in art? 2, they bring baggage. It's a difference between us speaking now. We've known each other for a few years, as opposed to the first time you meet someone, you know nothing about them. And yes, you do get that. God, I know this about you, and I know that about you, and you don't need to for the story to work. But if you do happen to have met the character in an earlier incarnation, then they bring things, and they bring tones and colours and baggage. 3, which is also true at Islington, it lets me be a maximalist and a minimalist at the same time. You know, when you were a kid and maybe you had the poster of Middle Earth that you could buy in those days, and had it blue tacked onto my wall, and it was quite heavy, so it would fall down from time to time, and I had to blue tack it back up, and I would salivate.
One.
That's the one.
Yep.
But I would salivate over the size of it, and I'd feel you're in the front of my mind yet again, because I YouTubed the one where you talk about 3 books that changed you, and your first one is the Narnia books. You talked about the voice there, and how conversational C.S. Lewis's voice was, and how that made you realize that it was something that mortals could do. You didn't have to be born Mozart to write. You could be a Salieri, yet still write Mozartian stuff here and there. So I wanted to be that maximalist. I wanted to write something as big as the Foundation books by Asimov, or as big as Earthsea by Ursula. Bless her. And that never went away. But also, when as I got older, I'm also intensely curious about things within boundaries, about bubbles, about lacunae, about enclosed worlds that are very specific and particular to a time and place. And the Uber novel, I can't quite say the word Mitchell verse without beginning to blush. This lets me do both. I can both build something enormous and be and do these relative miniatures. 550 pages isn't quite a miniature, but you know what I mean. Finally, though, there is a new one. There is a new reason, which is did you ever go through a phase where you invented games, fanatically complex games that were embryonic novels, looking back at it? Did you do that with Byzantine rules, and you spent more time devising the rules than you ever spent playing it, because it was world building?
World building, yes.
Yeah.
I definitely built a few, but most I just love drawing maps.
Yeah, me too.
That was the thing back then. It was like, okay, I could come up with rules and things, but really I like the idea of creating sort of games of something approaching risk on imaginary worlds, and the joy was creating the worlds and coming up with the name of the little island chain and the archipelago and the...
yeah, me too. And did you draw the forests and the woods in the same style as Mirkwood on the maps at the end of
Absolutely. And I would draw small and also borrowing stuff from Narnia, I would draw tiny little boats or sea serpents on the sea, just to indicate you knew that you draw sea serpents on the sea.
I missed out the sea serpents, but it feels slightly like that that characters who get away from my books, that there's a sort of malign entity at the end of the last one when he last met Slade House, where the antagonist gets away from that. My recurring invention, Marinus, killed her brother as far as she's concerned, and she sort of escapes in the body of an unborn child at the end of that book, and just that malignancy is going to continue. Or there's another character called Hugo Lamb who in the Bone Clocks, he got this sort of gift of about 35 years of not aging. So he would be about our age now, but he looks about 27. He is about 27 corporeally. And I'm starting to think of these characters as pieces on a board in a game. I don't know what the stakes are. I don't know what the sides, or who the sides are. I don't know what the rules are, but I just sort of feel it coagulating into being. And I think in about 3 books from now, I'm going to hopefully write something the size of American Gods, ideally something kind of really chunky. And it won't be a free book, but I think that will be maybe the maximum uber novel book that's sort of on its way. This wasn't a grand plan at the beginning 20 years ago. The second book I wrote, I just put a few touches from the first, because I thought when Haruki Murakami did it with the Sheep Man, I thought, oh, I know you, that's cool. I thought, yeah, I'll do that too. It's funny, isn't it, how your motivations evolve along with, hopefully, your craft, along with hopefully your use of language and your ability to cut down on the imagery. And well, you, I know, started off as a journalist, so I think you had that discipline anyway. I didn't. Over to you.
I started doing it for me when I was doing Sandman.
Right.
And some of that was just because it was a monthly comic and because there were ongoing storylines within things. There was an economy of when I need a new character, a lot of the times I would just run through everybody who'd ever appeared.
Yeah.
And just gone, oh, you could do this.
Yeah.
It's like kind of like having a rep company, or just having a bunch of friends you know.
Yeah.
Turn up. And then you had the other ones, because once you got characters that you kind of imbued with enough life, you could sometimes just go and check up on them in your head to find out what they're doing currently. And you sort of go, I wonder what's happening to you. I haven't seen you in a while. And you just think about them and you go, oh, by now, this is what you're doing. Okay, that's interesting. I think probably by the time I need you again, you'll be here. And you can, it's sort of, obviously you're doing it, but it almost feels slightly removed, as if you've created little machines or subroutines or subprograms that are going off and sort of working on their own.
Yes. I think of it as a kind of employment agency. When a new character comes along, that's a job vacancy opening up. And I think of, as a corporation might, firstly you advertise it in-house to see if anyone kind of down in the post room or over in sales is interested in applying for this new job in the editing department or something. Yeah. If someone fits first, then I will hire from in-house, and if not, then I'll put it online or send it down to the job center, which dates me. If but sort of advertise the job to the general public, and a character comes into being that way. I was in my head, I was preempting your last answer, Neil, about the Sandman, because we sort of went into that from the point of view of style and economy and craft. I read Sandman again just last year, all the way through from beginning to end. My first reading was about 6 or 7 years ago, and it just struck me how the arc of the whole thing, amongst many of the things, it also seems like a sort of to read it is to embark on a creative writing course, is what I want to say. And the you at the end of it doesn't seem to be the same artist who started it off. I'm wondering if it's quite a grand example of, I think Italo Calvino said about every book being the gift of every book is that it teaches you how you should have written it, which isn't to say there's anything wrong with someone at all, but the point is it's kind of lifelong learning, and every book does teach you stuff, and when they are in sequence, as Sandman is about the same cast, this becomes more visible.
Gene Wolfe, who died a few years ago and was one of my favorite American writers. I remember telling him proudly after I finished the first draft of American Gods that I said, Gene, I've learned how to write a novel. And looked at me with infinite pity, and he said, Neil, you never learn how to write a novel. You only learn how to write the novel you're on. Yeah. And it's true. You don't, you walk away from a novel or from a book going, I have learned how to write that thing that I did. And now if I'm doing my job, I'm going to start something else without the tools to do it, because I'm going to have to learn how to do it by making it. When you started Utopia Avenue, did you know the shape? Or did
I started actually, the thing I knew, and you remember it because it kind of gets grooved in when you're answering friends' questions about what are you working on now and what are you working on next. And I remember myself saying quite often, I wanted something, and in its middle would be this dance macabre. I read this A Dance of the Dead. I read Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann 4 or 5 years ago, set, as you'll know, in a tuberculosis sanatorium, high up in the mountains, where people went to go to take their chances with that disease, with that illness. And there's one chapter that's just extraordinary, just in the middle of it, where the living and the dead somehow merge, and there's a kind of a party. I thought, wouldn't that be great to have that in West London in 1968, full of everyone who's dead now? And that was my idea. And the book kind of grew forwards and backwards just out of that scene. Actually. And it's pretty much in the exact middle of the book as well. I kind of like what's the beginning, what's the end, what's halfway through.
I love that, because when people ask me what you have, they'll say, where does something begin? Do you have the beginning? Do you have the end? What do you have? And I always say, well, you have to have something. But that for me feels, it's such an act of accretion, because that chapter is all, it's filled with dead rock stars. It's filled with dead David Mitchell characters.
Yeah.
Actually, I think pretty much everybody who you encounter in that is the Hersheys and so forth. We know that these characters are dead. We watch Crispin get shot. Which again is very appropriate given his little gun. And then you have the sort of the weird callback to the death of Jasper's mother. You have the callback to 1,000 Autumns in there suddenly happening. You have all sorts of glorious. It's the summer of love, well, just past, and this is the party, and it's the party of the dead. It's the dance of the dead.
Love and death do tend to go together somehow, don't they? They're strange but regular bedfellows.
My favorite chapter in the Graveyard book is the weird little one right in the middle, which is the Dance Macabre. It's the Macabre, when just for one night the living and the dead literally dance in this little town, and then the living forget and the dead don't talk about it.
It's a lovely one.
Like, we're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
We're allowed to do that because we're making fiction and we're making stuff up. And because it's, I think, also a way of, I was playing the Spotify playlist. Somebody, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, has done a Utopia Avenue Spotify playlist.
I did one. There's a few more now, but there'll certainly be some overlap.
I don't know if it was yours or one of the others. I just put on a Utopia Avenue Spotify playlist, and it was playing while I was reading, which I love.
Oh wow!
And I kept thinking about how many of the people who had made this music were now dead.
Mm-hmm. 3/4 and counting at a rough guess, including the recording engineers, including the agents, including all the nameless people who made the music as well. But we still have the music.
Yeah.
We still have those dandelion seeds, which I know is a favourite metaphor of yours. One thing you said to the young man in Melbourne, Neil, was who asked you the "where do your ideas come from" question. You were very generous. You weren't dismissive of him. You turned it into a great riff about this is the only important question, and it's the only one that I can't really answer. But in that, you also talked about I think it was that one, about 1 million words that are no good, and you need to. This is great advice for writers starting off. Your first few projects are actually excavating those 1 million words before you get to the good stuff. And if you can do it in quicker than 1 million, all well and good. I'm just wondering if this might not also be true actually for a novel, for the, even for published authors. I usually go wrong once or twice or maybe 3 times. I kind of have to excavate the things that don't work in order to find the things that do work underneath. So I had this core idea at the middle of Utopia Avenue, but it took me a couple of jettisoned 60, 70, 80 pages worth of stuff, which you can partly cannibalize, but lots you can't, to then find the right route, to then find the right way in. Do you find this at all?
Yeah, definitely. You're always, I find 2 things tend to happen in novels. One of which is you get to the point where suddenly it was all going fine and now it's not. And it kind of stops.
Yeah.
Everything comes to a halt. And if you want, you could call it writer's block, but it's not really writer's block. What it is you've got stuck, and you've got stuck normally because you've done the equivalent of come off the road that you were on and follow what you thought was the road, and now that road turns out to be a little lane through a farm that's a dead end. And you come through the farm, and it was really interesting. You were sure you're on but you're out of road. And sometimes that involves, occasionally you can get back just by hacking road out in front of you. But normally it actually involves sort of backing up and going, this is where we went off the road. Let's go back on the road now.
And there's sometimes a voice in the back seat saying, "Are we lost, Daddy?" And being guys, I tend to say, no, I know exactly where we are. It takes a little while to find the humility to say, yes, I'm lost.
I remember writing Anansi Boys. I did the thing where I wasn't lost, but I suddenly didn't know where I was going.
Right.
And I just sort of parked. It was one of those things where I thought I was writing a comedy, and then a particularly vicious murder had just happened. And I went, I don't know what I'm doing. I know what I was doing when I thought I was writing a light comedy, and now this murder has happened, and I don't know how this book goes. And I stopped for maybe 2 months and just kept thinking about what comedy meant and what drama was and what I was doing. And I remember eventually coming up with some kind of formulation that satisfied me, where I thought, it's because I was trying to decide if I was now writing horror or whether I was writing humor. And I thought, in horror, everybody gets what's coming to them. Whereas in humor, everybody gets what they need. People in a Shakespearean comedy, everybody walks off at the end having been given whatever they need, even if what they needed was a terrible thing, or punishment, or humiliation, or whatever. You get what you need. You don't get what you deserve or what's coming to you. And I thought, okay, it may not even be true, but I can take that and think with it and get back on the road. And it's like having a little roadmap. I go, as long as everybody in this story gets what they need, by the end, I will be fine. It's still a comedy.
It sounds very like a certain Rolling Stones song that springs to mind straight away. I was also thinking when you were talking, were you fascinated by the free parking square on the Monopoly board?
Yeah.
What are you there for? Like, what do you do? Like, you're the one square that's safe. Nothing bad will happen to you, but you don't gain anything from it either, unless you play that version of the game where all the fines go into the middle, and the next person to land on free parking is allowed to scoop up the money. That was relatively late arrival to my Monopoly life. I was wondering if there's a free parking space both in novels, and novels of this baggy, lovely, capacious form, because not everything actually, unlike a script, I think you might agree, needs to earn its place. You can have some parts of novels that earn their places more than others. You can have relative lulls, you can have relative free parking spaces in novels, and far from that being a flaw, that's that's an enhancement of the whole. But also, from the way you were talking, actually in the process of writing, there's also a free parking space where you get to a point. I think, like you, I don't really believe in writer's block. I think it's a highfalutin word for something a little bit more prosaic, but nonetheless, there's a lull you sometimes need to enter to be able to take stock and work out something like everyone needs to get what they need.
I often wind up people ask me if I do outlines, and I tend to admit that I'm much more likely to do an outline 3/4 of the way through.
Right.
Just to sit and list everything that needs to happen in order to get to the end, so I don't forget something enormous.
Yeah, it's true.
By the time you get there, you've got all of these, you've been running around and you've been spinning all the plates, and all of those plates are now spinning. And there is that vague terror that you'll get to the end of the novel and walk off and there'll be one lone plate.
That's maybe an under-discussed aspect of creativity, which is a word I'm a little bit allergic to, but I can't think of a better one, so let's use it. It's a sort of question of outwitting your own amnesia, outwitting your own forgetfulness.
There's also that marvelous quote from Ted Hughes that Wendy Cope made fun of, and I love her making fun of it, and I also love the quote, which is where he says that all advances that any poet makes come from outwitting your inner police force.
All advances that any poet makes, of course, we're talking artistic advances rather than financial advances.
Definitely, yes, artistic advance. Yeah. And Wendy Cope did a parody of The Policeman's Lot Is Not a Happy One. You know, it's not the kind of job a chap would choose patrolling the unconscious of Ted Hughes. One of those. But it's true, you outwit your inner amnesiac, you outwit your inner policeman, you outwit the weird little ghosts that look over your shoulder and go, what if your parents were reading this? And then once you finally come to terms with them, the other ghosts pop over the other shoulder and go, but what if your kids read this?
Let's just not go there. That's how I handle that ghost. Just I know you're there, I know you're real, but it's basically la da 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 when you're a kid, isn't it?
It is. But what's weird and lovely about it also, I think, with that one is once it's on the page, it's kind of done. It's the point where it's awful is when you're trying to write it and you're going, oh my God, my kids would read this. Once you've done it, you know, get phone calls from my kids saying, Dad, end of American Gods, chapter 1, bit weird. And it's like, yep, do you like it? Yeah, you're weird. And we have currently, shall we?
Oh my word, we really should. Look, I've just got one as a fan and admirer. Mate, when's your next novel? But we sort of, can you say anything to us, other fans, admirers, and Gaiman fanciers who hope and dream of the news that a new thumping great 600-pager by one of our favourite writers is on its way? Help? Anything you can give us? Any little crumbs?
I can. So working up to it slowly, there is a children's book coming out this September, October in the UK, and I think December in the US, called Pirate Stew, because I had to write a book for my 5-year-old.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Comes out. So that's very, very silly, and it's a big poem. And right now I'm writing 2 works of prose, one of which is a short children's book, where I go when I get stuck, and I do a bit of work on that. And it's all about frogs in Central Park. And I'm desperately hoping that it's going to behave and stay a short children's book. It's meant to be a short children's book about these frogs. And it seems to be becoming a lot more about libraries. And so I'm just sort of letting this thing happen. But I'm also working now. I've picked up again. I had to do a thing a few years ago, which I'd never done before, of put down a novel in the middle and a middle of writing it and go, I hope you are there when I come back. Because for various reasons, I suddenly found myself actually show running Good Omens. I'd thought I was going to be the showrunner, the showrunner. I'd swan in. I'd go, good job, everybody, and I'd swan. It was not that. I was there, more. Michael Chabon had the same thing with Star Trek Picard, bless him.
Yeah.
We'd compare some notes, and he admitted that I was rather more right than he had. I gave him all of these warnings when he told me he was about to do it. It's like, okay, you're not going to get a lot of sleep and things like that. And he's like, no, the producers are going to do all that stuff. I'll just do this stuff. And man got no sleep. But I had to put away a novel. And then once I was done and recovered, it was kind of like it wasn't quite there for me. It was still, I loved what I'd done, but the forward motion had actually stopped and I had to get back to it. And I've just recently, in lockdown, I guess, suddenly found myself having to do something or go mad. And that was sitting there waiting for me. So I have a Neverwhere novel called The Seven Sisters.
Great.
And it's very strange, and the peculiar time things that are hinted at in Neverwhere actually allow me to do stuff that I never thought I was going to be able to do, because it's all set now. But it's also starring Richard Mayhew, who disappeared in Neverwhere in about 1996. Whoa. And for him, about 6 months has passed. So when he actually gets to look at London Above, he's kind of rather weirded out by some of these strange things that they seem to have built very quickly.
Yeah.
And I get to just compare and contrast, I think, some of the last 25 years with now, and that is fascinating.
Well, I think you've made a lot of people very happy with that news. And if I were Alan Partridge, which might not mean much to many North Americans, but if I was Alan Partridge, I'd say we should perhaps end that part of our event on that bombshell.
And on that
bombshell. Yes, there's some very patient people in the Q&A section. So we click on that and see what we've got.
I like the first one. What's one thing in 2020 you have been wrong or incorrect about?
That was so much.
Only one.
What's one thing I've been correct about? Don't know. What do you think? Yeah, I thought that the pandemic, we're going to summer. It'll blow over by July. I'll be able to go on book tour in July. That'll be fine. It'll be grand. How about you?
I think, well, the biggest thing that I was wrong about was leaving New Zealand, where it was just like, well, they've sorted it out. They've sorted it out so fast and so easily. Everywhere else will be able to do what they did. I'll head out. I'll rendezvous again with my wife in a couple of months in America when everything's sane, and just watching everything spiral out. And now we're trying to figure out how to get back to New Zealand, because that's where she is and that's where my son is. So that's the biggest one, where it was like, well, I should have been right. Everything makes sense. It just actually, I was very...
Well, maybe Michael Chabon will be able to slip you one of those transporter beams that he uses on his show to move the actors around the sets, and you'll be able to rematerialize in New Zealand in the morning.
I figure that if all else fails, I will go to Amazon Prime and the Prime Video, Amazon Studios people, and explain to them my predicament. And all of a sudden, in the Lord of the Rings television series, there will be Nilo Proudfoot, the Greek hobbit, will be going, I did not know that Nilo was here. What a tall hobbit Nilo is. Yes, Nilo Proudfoot is indeed a very tall hobbit who we haven't seen here before. And that will be my way.
You might want to market yourself as an Ent rather than the Hobbit. That's kind of my advice.
Excellent Ent.
Neil Beard, and nothing too hasty. So we better run through a few more of these questions, or
okay, pick the next one.
How about one, say, for both authors, because then we can both have a go. Well, there's a repeated theme here, both from Kevin Cross and Mark Miano. How soon will it be until authors like the two of you start incorporating a global pandemic into your fiction?
Probably, I suspect that we will all be writing about the pandemic, because this is a time that is unlike any other time. But I also think we may wind up waiting to see what happens before we write about it.
Because we have 10 years of history happening every 6 months, and by the time you got a book out, it would end up being dramatically out of date, potentially, until things have settled down a little bit. I think that's possible. I think it's also likely that at some level we'll never not be writing about this time. It will somehow slightly remix, a bit like a music track, kind of what many of us are and how many of us think, writers and non-writers, artists and non-artists, at least professionally, and that shadow, or that or the alterations that 2020 brings around, I think will never not be with us. What do you think?
It's definitely a stone that has been thrown into the pond, and we're going to be writing with the ripples, whatever we're doing. And it's really weird making television right now, which we can't do because everything I'm doing is kind of on hold.
Yeah.
We're having to kind of make small decisions anyway on, is this set now? Is it set in a future in which there is a vaccine and the pandemic is history, or is it set in a kind of alternate world that we would have been in if we hadn't have been plunged into a dystopia and everything had just sort of carried on normally?
Yeah.
And we're having to sort of make those decisions because you're trying to tell stories, but how do you tell those stories, and what are those stories?
And the only certainty is you can't fail to make that decision. You have to choose one of those routes, or another route. But to act as if this never happened makes you it makes it alternate history, which only 4 months ago, 5 months ago, would have been the likely future. So it has been shunted,
I
hasn't
had
it?
a friend who sent me a fantastic first chapter of a fantastic book that he decided to start writing, and the first chapter which he sent me took place on a cruise, and then somewhere in the middle of the chapter there was just a line about the pandemic or about COVID, and it threw me so far out of the story because I'm like, well, hang on. So you're telling me there's a post-COVID world in which people are back on cruise ships and everybody's cruising, and I can't quite get there in my head in this, I've just done that skip where I thought I was either comfortable in the past or maybe in an alternate present. But if you're telling me I'm in the future, then it's a different story, and I have to start looking for different cues.
We're just working through. I mean, we know these ripples are rippling out, but what form they take, where they reach, what the influence will be, heaven only knows at the moment. Would you like to choose the next question now?
I am fascinated by the interconnectedness of your novels, says Tom Whitty. They all appear to take place in the same or adjacent universes. Have you imagined this interconnectedness from the start in your most recent works? Or is it something that happens naturally as you write? Well, I guess we've answered that one really.
Kind of have, I think, yeah.
Well, let's go for Christy, the next one, children's librarian here. My students love Neil's chapter and picture books. David, would you ever write for a young audience?
Possibly not. I'm slightly sorry to say. I would like to. I wish I could. I love the idea of being able to do it, but I've tried, and it is hard. It's really hard. So I'd sort of like to spin the question round on a sixpence, and just ask Neil. I'd like to find a more literary version of how do you do it. But since we're running out of time, I'll just stick with that. How'd you do it?
I've done it really 3 times properly now, and a few times in shorter work. I did it in Coraline, I did the Graveyard Book, and I did a book called Fortunately the Milk. And done some other smaller fun things, but those are, I think, are the 3 major things I've done for kids. You do it by writing for yourself at that age. You do it by being sort of by an act of peculiar mental time travel, where you rewind your head to what it was like to be 7, and then you write a book for that person, and you put in the things that they would like, or the things that you rewind your head to 12 or whatever, and you go, okay, this is for you. And I can do that. I can't do it very well if I'm writing for someone else. Although Coraline was filled with all the things that my daughter Holly loved. They were filled with, witches and ghost children and scary stuff, because she was that kind of kid and she loved it.
Yeah.
But I was still writing it for me. But I guess the more key thing of how do you do it is you find the voice. And it's all about narrative voice. If you can find what the book sounds like, and then you can trust it and almost lean back into it, and it will do a lot of the work for you.
It kind of rhymes with a fairly recent discovery, just for me, of my own little trajectory about writing and a character, and maybe this thing called soul as well. I've only perhaps embarrassingly recently noticed that a character either is or isn't alive, is or isn't plausible, is or isn't sort of imbued with this magnetic wish to find out what happens to them next. This quality resides now. I always thought it was a knockout backstory, or kind of somehow in the depths of their psyche, but I'm starting to think more recently it's actually right there on the surface. It's in how they speak.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think one of the things that I love about your dialogue is your characters sound like themselves. And that shouldn't even be something one needs to point out, except that for so many writers, characters' dialogue sounds an awful lot like the voice of the person writing the book, and the characters all sound a lot like each other. They kind of talk like each other. Yours, I always feel like you can hear them, and because you can hear them, you write down what they say, and they don't sound like each other.
Again, thank you. And if this is sort of a place I've arrived at, it's by following the following simple method, which is to imagine the scene in Being John Malkovich, where he goes inside his own head and all the characters are John Malkovich and speaking like John Malkovich and running as fast and as far as I can in the opposite direction. And so that's where I get to. I again liked what you said about C.S. Lewis, who, although did some pretty neat pieces of work, I mean, I think you might agree, the Narnia sequence, and particularly the last book, it's a bit of a curate's egg, isn't it?
It is very much a curate's egg. And of course, I love the fact that curate's egg, it was years before I realized what the curate's egg cartoon actually meant. Because, you can't have a curate's egg, I'm afraid your egg is off. Oh no, parts of it are very good. And of course, there is no such thing as an egg which is partly off and parts of it are very good. Your egg is off. With The Last Battle has some wonderful pages and is a terrible book. It's a bad book, and I thought it was a bad book when I was 7. But I thought it was a bad book when I was 7 because I wasn't grown up enough to appreciate it. And then it was reading it to my kids as an adult and having to do that, twice so far, and I'm sure I'm going to have to read it again to Ash. And realizing, no, this is actually objectively a bad book. A lot of the structurally, it's a mess, and emotionally, it's a mess. And the giant message of this story, which is kind of, everything's okay, because look, they died in a horrible train crash. And I'm not sure
I just brought that up because despite that, the voice, there's soul in C.S. Lewis's voice elsewhere, and that's just about 200 printed pages away from Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is in so many ways, objectively, by any metric you want, a really, really strong book.
It is a more or less perfect book.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
It is. Although, and then there is the curate's egg thing. There are those little moments. There are jewels in The Last Battle.
Yeah.
And some of them are sort of these gloriously anti-Christian jewels. The idea, the point where Aslan basically turns round to the Kalaman prince and says, no, it's okay, because you were worshipping Tash, god of evil, but because you were aiming, you were imagining something good, actually you were worshipping me all the time. So you're fine, and you're coming to heaven. And you want to go, excuse me, so good. So what you're saying is, as long as your intentions are good, you get to heaven anyway. You don't actually have to be part of this particular group. You're allowed to be part of the opposition. This is cool. So
I guess that's a broad church Anglican streak. Anyway, is it anything that's grabbing your fancy further down, Neil?
When is the album from the book getting issued, in our universe or in?
I guess like the interesting thing is if I kind of do your route and if it becomes a TV show of some kind at some point in the future, then these songs can no longer not exist. They don't actually have to be there, because novels do have TVs do have speakers, or laptops do have speakers. So perhaps sort of if/when at that stage, I guess.
Well, somebody else says something very similar. You both naturally, Edward Hoover says, spent a lovely amount of time addressing my first question. Here's another. David, was it daunting to write songs? The Aaron Sorkin show, Studio 60, about an SNL type comedy show, got criticism because the comedy bits weren't funny. But of course, it seems to me that you didn't really write songs. You wrote some lyrics here and there, and you described the songs, and you described what it feels like to hear the songs.
Yes. Yeah.
But you might have to one day write this.
Well, no, it's we're in the age of extra content, aren't we? In some ways, publishing is taking a trick from the music industry in this respect, and so I've actually written all of the lyrics for all of the songs on the first album as a sort of a freebie for American pre-orders for the hardback first edition, I think. So they're kind of out there, and of course, when they're out there, thanks to the internet, they'll be everywhere and out there. So we will see. It's rash to assume you're multi-talented and can do everything, and certainly my respect for the likes of Bernie Taupin went up. People who write lyrics for music that doesn't exist yet. I hope I made a decent fist of it, but time will tell, I guess.
It's very odd that I've been, for the last few years, for the last 7 or 8 years, living in a house in Woodstock, New York, with all sorts of strange rock and roll connections. And every now and then I learn more about my house, and I suddenly discover that this is the space that Bob Dylan was sleeping with both Joan Baez and Sarah Lowndes at the same time, and when Joan left her earrings by the bed, Bob presented them to Sarah, who wanted to know why there were earrings, and said, "Oh, they're for you." And
excuse me. Whoa! Just pause a moment. Are you living in Big Pink?
No, Big Pink is where they recorded the band stuff.
Okay. Is that also in Woodstock?
It's on the way to it's Woodstock.
Okay.
I was about to say it's on the way to Saugerties, but this means nothing. But I'm in Bearsville, in a house that once belonged to Albert Grossman.
Oh wow! My word.
Every now and then we run into weird little things. My mantelpiece in my house is the Bring It All Back Home mantelpiece.
I am lost for words. I am literally, for once, lost for words. If those walls could talk, if that mantelpiece could talk, if those earrings could talk, wow.
And every now and then somebody will walk through the house who was there back then and tell me a story about something that happened, and I will learn all the ins and outs of the painting that Andy Warhol gave Bob Dylan that he brought back to the house and then traded with Albert for a 3-piece sofa, leather sofa, armchair that he liked the look of. He took back to his house, and how every time it rained, they had to put the Andy Warhol Shooting Elvis painting up on milk crates because the floor of Albert's office would get wet. And it, you know, all these stories have that lovely Utopia Avenue effect of actually you're allowed to put all of these characters into these things because they were all there. You know, and they were all there at the same time. And Nick used to come up and spend weekends with them. And back when she was, you know, having before Chelsea Girls was being recorded, when she was being nice to people to get songs out of them, and all of that kind of stuff was all happening. And you go, yes, all of these people intersected.
Regarding the cameos, I realised fairly early on it would be weird if they weren't there rather than weird if they were. So it's actually for mimesis that I put them in. Now, in a sense here, you're talking about rock and roll ghosts and popular culture ghosts, which it has just led me to a question I've never actually asked you. Have you seen ghosts?
When I was 12 or 13, our house was down, all of these spaces have now gone. It's all paved over, it's all world, but we're down a tiny little stone lane a long way from anywhere. And they put in a lamp post when they built our house, one of those old sodium lamps, the big tall ones, which was incredibly random because you were halfway down, you know, half a mile down a little flint lane in the middle of nowhere that led off to farmhouses.
Yeah.
And I remember once coming out of my house, and there was a woman standing underneath the light, the sodium light, and that had never happened before because there was never anybody there. And she was dressed kind of like a, you know, if the nearest I've ever seen to the way that she was dressed was years later in South America with the Romani people in South America. In Argentina, in Patagonia, there were Romani people down there, and they were dressed kind of like her. And I said hello. I stopped and was surprised, and I said hello and expecting her to say something back, and she just sort of stood under the lamp and stared through me, and I got terrified, and I ran around the corner, and then I stopped and I thought, you're being an idiot, and I walked back and there was nobody standing under the lamp. And it's perfectly possible that she had slipped away, and it's perfectly possible it was a completely normal thing that happened. That's my one peculiar, inexplicable, it happened, I don't know where to put it. It doesn't have any punchline. You know, if it was told in a story, you then learn about the Romani encampment there 200 years before or whatever. But I mean, you're in the middle of a Sussex field for the previous 1,000 years.
It still made the hairs go up on my arm, which Zoom won't show, but strange, isn't it? Has she ever appeared in your fiction?
Not yet, but I'm sure she will one day. Everything kind of does. Yeah. And sometimes things appear in your fiction, and it's only later that you realize where you took them from. It's only afterwards that things always seem to, for me, have to compost.
So that word again, so many writers use that metaphor, so many. I was doing an event with Susan Cooper the other day, you know, The Dark is Rising, his books, which we've never talked about, but they're great, she's great. And we I asked her, as I often do, I think I did with yourself as well the first time I met you, kind of what's in your compost heap from childhood. And she said, that's so spooky, because that's exactly the metaphor I use.
I think any author who has ever done any gardening of any kind recognizes it's a metaphor that is sitting there waiting for the taking. Because you watch this stuff and it's the detritus of your day, and you throw it into this thing, and then it becomes unrecognizable, and then things grow out of it. And
we may just have invented a new class of metaphor there, the automatic metaphor, or the autophor. Should we do a couple more questions? I know I'm...
what music impacted you the most? Asked Christine Pester right down at the bottom.
At what age? I mean, in what era? Or
pick anything. What music
impacted me the most? Canadians won't be surprised to hear me say this, because I've said it on one or two recent Canadian things. But I was speaking to Michael Chabon about this as well. The album Moving Pictures by Rush with Tom Sawyer on. You know that album?
Yeah.
That made it okay to be an adolescent geeky kid who was into books. That legitimized high register vocabulary. That made it okay to it made it okay to read and to be into rock music, and at a time and a place where it was more than just a matter of taste, it was kind of survival. There was, as music does different things at different different ages of your life, and these multiply as you age, but for a while, when you're an adolescent, music is the answer. It's an answer to the question, who am I? What kind of person am I? It's a mirror in which you can see future, better, more preferable versions of yourself than the spotty kid looking back at you. And it's also a kind of a tribe. I'm into this kind of music. I'm that. I dress like that. I play like that. I spend my W.H. Smith's vouchers and my birthday pound notes on this, not that, on this. And Rush was all of these things for me. And that album in particular, it's in my compost heap. It's a gift that's kept giving. And I suppose also something you find when you're our age, a song is also a time machine. It takes you back to the very first morning when you first heard it. You can smell what was going on in the room. I'm not sure if this is as true in the age of Spotify, where music is always like water. You just help yourself as much as you want, and artists tend not to get paid, which is a problem. But then you could get it was so scarce a resource that your first encounter with it is almost like an early boyfriend or a girlfriend. It's sort of like an early relationship. It was a relationship
over and over again.
Yeah.
In a way, you had to play an album at least until you discovered that you liked the tracks that you didn't like.
Yeah.
Once you hit that point, you were now having a completely different relationship with the music. I think for me, the thing, looking back on it, it was fascinating hearing you answer that, because I thought, do I have one of those? And I suspect that my one of those is probably The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars.
Wow.
But in the sense of, it's by no means my favorite album, but it was the stone that was dropped in the pool.
Yeah.
And from it, everything kind of echoed out. I remember, because Bowie had produced Lou Reed, getting
Yeah.
Transformer, and then finding the Velvet Underground, and discovering Iggy Pop, and moving. It was that place that the science fiction stuff and the fantasy stuff that was in my head felt like it had finally reached. It was pop music that was doing the same thing emotionally. The idea of this Starman, the idea that you start an album with a song called 5 Years, about we've only got 5 years left to live, and it's like, okay, this is science fiction. I know this world. I recognize this. I am going on 13, and I can talk this language. This is me. But I've only ever encountered it in books, and now it's in the music, and now I have to find out everything about this.
Sung, of course, by a character now.
Yeah.
There's something very novelistic about Bowie. I don't know if you've seen that recent documentary, David Bowie Finding Fame. It starts off essentially when he's just left school, and it ends at the height of Ziggy. And he spent years going nowhere when he was sort of trying to be himself.
Yes.
And only when he put on the makeup and pretended to be someone completely different did it all fall into place for him, which makes him oddly novelistic, don't you think?
The moment that he started playing a rock star, and and what's interesting is lots of rock stars became rock stars by playing rock stars. Bowie was the only one who realized that they came with expiry dates, who actually would pull the plug on an identity and create and roll around a new identity, like a new novel. And some of them were appalling, and some of them were glorious. And
the common factor was that he pulled the plug on them. He didn't wait until the world pulled the plug on it.
Exactly. He would leave them wanting more. Nobody was more shocked than his band when he informed them that was the last Ziggy Stardust gig.
The documentary interviews the musicians, and they would concur completely. We should go back to questions, and I guess we should stop. I'm going to regret it intensely if I don't ask you this. Your time in TV world, your time in screen world, your time doing these things that have necessarily taken you away from the novels, of course, but what have you learned from them? What have you got from them? Because I'm going to guess that you didn't just do it for for the glamour. I think we've established that there's not a lot. But if you're like me, you've said yes. You say yes to those offers that you think you're going to learn something from and make you a better equipped storyteller, a better equipped novelist. What have you brought back from it?
That's a weird one, though, because I said yes to Good Omens because we'd been looking for 3 or 4 years for somebody to adapt Good Omens. And Terry Pratchett, I'd written the novel 25 years before with Terry. Now he had Alzheimer's. He'd had Alzheimer's at that point for 5 or 6 years, and it hadn't really, maybe longer, and it hadn't seemed to affect him. He was still writing more books and better books with Alzheimer's than I do without Alzheimer's. And then it was the summer of 2014, and I went down to Terry's house to record our little bit part in a Good Omens Radio 4 adaptation.
Yeah.
And Terry and I realized at that point, Terry couldn't read. So I would read Terry's line and he would say it.
Yeah.
And then because he wasn't sure which was my lines and which were his lines, I'd say my line and he'd say it. And
Right.
it was, and afterwards we sat down in Terry's space and talked about all sorts of things. And a few days later, I got an email from him. And the email said, "You have to write the Good Omens TV series because I can't, and I want to see it. And I know that you're too busy, but nobody else has the love for the old girl that you and I do. Nobody else understands it like us, and I want to see it before the lights go out."
Whoa.
And at that point, it was like,
Yeah.
I didn't really have a choice. I thought would have ages, and then all of a sudden, very shortly after, Terry fell into a coma, and very shortly after that, he died. And I went to his funeral in April 2015, flew home, and it's the only time in my life I've ever flown to the UK for, I think I was in for 36 hours. I was just there for the funeral. Amanda was pregnant and things were dodgy, and I flew home.
Yeah.
And I got home and I started writing episode 1. And
Wow.
nothing was funny, but I knew that I had to write it for him. So for me, it was a kind of, it wasn't one of those ones where I'm going into this to learn.
Yeah.
Even though I've learned so much from from everything that I did. I actually, and the biggest thing that I learned is I can no longer be bullshitted in the way that I could be bullshitted by, showrunners on things that were adaptations of things of mine previous.